Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being patient with us. We've had some technical difficulties this morning. My name is Susan Barrett. We're continuing to have a couple of technical difficulties, and Lucille will try to join us as soon as she can get audio. I think a couple of you saw the poll come up and completed it, so I thank you for doing that. We'll circle back with that in just a second. So welcome to our OSEP National Technical Assistance Center PBIS webinar. We're going to be talking about training and coaching capacity today. And just as a reminder, as grantees and as you implement based on your funding proposal, we want to make sure that you understand that our center offers guidance based on our experiences from working with states and districts and schools implementing behavioral support frameworks, but we do not speak for Safe and Healthy Students or for OSEP. And the information provided today is designed to help you be successful. It's not mandatory. So we're just going to be providing you resources and lessons learned based on our experiences and the work that we're doing. 62% of you already completed poll number 1. Unfortunately, I won't be able to share the poll again. Once we close it out, it cannot be shared again. So I will give you the kind of the results of the poll. Thank you so much for completing that. I can share the results. Looks like today we've got 8% of you are representing your state education agency. We've got 30% of you who are representing an LEA administrator. Most of you are district-based PBIS coach, so that's really, really great. We're happy that you're joining us today, and we're going to gear a lot of the conversation today built around the district-based PBIS coach and the role and function that you have in training and coaching and supporting the schools that you're assigned to. We've got 3% that are in the evaluation mode and 19% other. We also want to encourage you to ask questions as we go through the material, post some chat in the chat box, and we've got Jessica Swain-Bradway who's also on the line who will be helping Lucille and me answer any questions that you might have. We do have all of you muted today, so the only way that you'll be able to interact with us is through the chat line. So for today's purpose, and we have probably about 40 minutes remaining, and again, apologies for getting started so late. We're going to go through assessing the current status of your implementation. Today, we're also going to help identify some core pieces of the database training plan. We're going to identify some specific curriculum that you have available to you to use for training and implementing PBIS. We're going to talk a little bit about the ongoing training process that we need to make sure that as our schools are implementing that there's an ongoing access to coaching and technical assistance that's provided to the teams to ensure that we are reaching fidelity and that we're preventing misapplication of the information that's being provided to our schools. We're going to talk very little about selecting and training coaches today, but we're going to talk about some of the core features of what a coach does and what supports they need in order to do their job well. And we're going to end with an example of professional development plan. So a couple big messages before we kind of dive into some of the details here. The big message for today is that as you're investing in training your school level teams, it will be really important for you to invest in training trainers and coaches and making sure that that's a parallel process as you're setting up your team training. One of the things that we have learned from Joyce and Showers is that there's a really big difference between training and implementation. And we know that providing training is not enough to result in implementation. We know that the research says that really the most effective way to change adult behavior in schools really needs to have within it a coaching, technical assistance person that's guiding the effort. We know that the administrator
Excuse me, Susan. Your poll is still displayed and your slides aren't showing. You need to hide the poll. There you go.
There, thank you. Sorry about that, guys. So we know that we need to have the administrator support the implementation and actively participate within the training. We know that the administrator also needs to give time, space, and support to the team planning for implementation. And we know that the team needs to have data, an ongoing way to access feedback of the way that they're engaging in implementation. So when we are setting up our training, it's important that our teams that represent our school communities are present, that our administrators are there during the training and actively participating, that they have data, surveys from their staff, discipline data that reflects what's going on, and they really need to have the coach participate in the actual training event to guide that action planning process that takes place during the event itself. The other consideration or big idea that we have to pay close attention to is that just because schools get trained within the same year, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to move through the implementation phases at the same rate. So to be able to organize your schools that you're working with, using the phases of implementation rather than a cohort or the year trained is going to be really important. The other factor here is to make sure that we understand that full implementation takes between 2 to 4 years. We're really talking about changing adult behavior and really making huge systemic changes within our schools, and we have to be patient with that process. So as you're moving your schools through the phases of implementation, through installing some of the data systems, installing some of the teaming structures, it's important to reflect on the amount of time it really takes to reach full implementation. So let's talk about reflecting on where you currently are with implementation. I want you to think about the schools that you're working in and the districts that you're working in, and think about the type of training content that's already been provided to your school teams. And to what extent have the school teams been trained in the core features of PBIS? Do you have access to ongoing modules for booster trainings throughout the year? So when you're seeing data reflect or indicate a specific feature that a school needs to work on, do you have access to ongoing training events that allow increased fidelity of implementation with those core features? To what extent have those features been adapted to fit the culture of the school that you're working in? And here's where that experienced coach really plays a significant role. We really want the features to be adapted to the developmental and the cultural context, but we want to prevent the misapplication of those features. So we need an experienced coach that guides that effort and that has a broad range of examples to be able to provide that school team so that they have an easier time implementing to fit their own needs. To what extent are you implementing with fidelity? So today we're going to talk about the tiered fidelity tool as a measure and a gauge to identify where our schools are doing really well with implementation and where they need extra support. So being able to identify that fidelity tool is really going to be critically important as you build your training curriculum and as you assess fidelity. The other thing we really want to reflect on is that overall district-level professional development plan. Being able to organize your schools and group them based on need is really going to be an important piece of this. And we're going to talk and give examples about how to use the data that you're collecting on fidelity assessments in order to group your schools based on need and really build your training curriculum based on the needs of the schools that are within your district. The other thing we want you to reflect on as you're reviewing your fidelity data is matching the coaching support based on the need within your school. And we want to make sure that there is that your trainers and your coaches are also supported in this process. So this is a nice kind of graphic organizer of all of the activities that our district leadership teams are involved in. And if you've listened to previous webinars, you've seen this graphic organizer. Today we're going to talk, and we've been talking specifically about training, but thinking about the way that you've designed your professional development in your district is going to be important, and we're going to talk about that today. And we're also going to be talking a little bit about the coaching and technical assistance planning piece that you're going to be working on. It's important that there's this interaction between your evaluation plan and how you align your professional development and your coaching into that plan. And so there's this continuous kind of feedback loop that you go through as the year progresses. When you go and get your fidelity checks, it informs the way that you change or augment your training. So we want to make sure that you're taking that into consideration. The other thing that we talked about in a previous webinar was the data that gets collected. We talked about mapping current interventions and current innovations that you're using. We also talked about the self-assessment survey to really get a gauge of where your teachers are reflecting on the current implementation, and getting their feedback is incredibly important. Climate information is also going to be important, and being able to have an ongoing review of the discipline data is also important as schools continue to work and develop their action planning process. But we're also really, again, trying to build fidelity of implementation and make sure that our training and coaching matches our evaluation. So as we begin to think about how we're using data with respect to training and coaching, that data really informs the leadership team about the current level of performance, the areas of strength, and the areas of need. So again, you're going to align your training curriculum to match the needs of the schools that you're working in. You're going to sort the schools based on need, and you're going to assign your coaches to schools, and you're going to differentiate the level of coaching intensity based on what your individual schools need. The other thing we want to talk about today is the training material. A lot of our states and districts have anchored the training material to the fidelity tool that they selected. So for instance, today we're going to talk about the tiered fidelity inventory, and we're going to give examples about the way the training materials are anchored to that tool that really lends itself to gaining fluency with that tool, so that when your schools are reflecting on the implementation status, they're very familiar with the words in that tool, with the way that it's organized. As you're building training capacity, this organizational style really helps promote consistency and really helps us stay true to the core features. So as you're building your evaluation plan, hopefully you've decided on the fidelity tool that you're using to gather that data from your schools. Again, we're going to focus today on the new tiered fidelity inventory as a way to gauge fidelity of implementation across the tiers. What's your frequency of data collection? How often will your school teams complete that inventory in order to progress monitor implementation? And when do you expect them to complete that? The other aspect of completing that, we need to consider having an experienced coach sit with the team and guide them through that process. When we're analyzing the data, we can again look at that data in aggregate and identify what teams are doing well using our fidelity measures. We can look at what training needs they have and adjust the training and coaching to fit their profile. So this is an example of several schools that took the data in January. So the blue bar indicates implementation of Tier 1 January of 2014. When the district implementation team took a look at this data, they were able to position their training effort around and coaching support. So they were able to increase coaching support for this school and this school, so that when they took another progress monitoring data collection piece, they noticed that they were all able to reach fidelity. So this is an example of looking at that tiered fidelity data in aggregate and making decisions around positioning their training curriculum and coaching to match that and to make sure that they were all kind of moving to reach that fidelity piece. So we're interested in finding out more about what your experience is. What data do you have already available to you right now? It's the end of the school year, and by now you should at least have one fidelity check under your belt that will give you an indication of how to build your training curriculum. So what data do you have already available to guide your implementation plan, and what data do you want to pursue next year to inform your capacity building piece? And so we want to have you take a couple minutes to enter information into the chat. I'm not seeing anyone put information into the chat, so I'm not sure if you all are having problems.
Susan, this is Jessica. Susan, this is Jessica. The chat is not working, but the questions pod is. So folks are entering in, they're using the benchmarks of quality. We're using the TFI, creating action plans at completion with each building. We're using the self-assessment survey, TFI set, and the I set. It's great. BOQ BAT and the outcome data summary, TFI, set and SAS, BOQ. Got a lot of folks using some great fidelity measures here, Susan. SAS, BOQ. We have used the TIC this year. Excellent. TFI. Folks are really linking into a lot of these fidelity measures already. We've got at least a dozen, if not 16 responses. So this is really, yeah.
Okay, thanks everybody. So I'm glad you're able to connect with us in some way. I'm sorry that the chat isn't working, but we are getting those. We are getting responses. So, and that's great news. I'm glad that folks are using all of the fidelity tools that they have, and hopefully that's guiding their training plan. So again, when you're building your training plan, we want to make sure that the modules are anchored to the core features. And I'm going to give you an example of what that looks like in just a couple of seconds. The other aspect in terms of the training process, readiness is a huge piece of what we do within the training process. It is really important that our school teams are coming to training, having an indication of what their current fidelity measure indicates. We also want to have them do a data review before the actual training event. We want to make sure that they're well positioned to use that time really effectively, and that they've got the right information to really inform their action planning, their implementation planning. The initial training event actually has teams spending time on their action planning process. During implementation, we also want to make sure that there's that ongoing use of data to reflect on how they're doing throughout the grades that they're working with. And then this notion of booster trainings throughout the year. Notice that the coach is guiding that process throughout readiness into ongoing training. It's absolutely essential that there is a coach, an external technical systems provider that is working with that team throughout this process and is assigned in doing that. The other piece in terms of collecting and using data for decision making and looking at data in the aggregate is identifying the booster sessions, the pacing, and again, that need for increase or fading support. So many of you are already using a Fidelity tool, and we want to make sure that the training materials are anchored to the inventory. And I've already talked about some of the benefits to this, but just to refresh kind of your memory about the TFI, because this is a relatively new tool that we're using to track fidelity of implementation across the years, I want to just show you the way that the actual tool is organized. So we start with, on the left-hand side, operationally defining the core feature. In this case, it's team composition, right? So we get very specific about what needs to happen, what needs to be in place. The second part, in the second column, we want to see data sources. So we want to see products that get developed as a result of implementing that feature. So if I'm conducting a school-wide evaluation tool and I don't know too much about your school, these products will help me assess the extent to which the feature is in place. The team then scores based on this rubric on in the last column. So you have the coach assisting the team with reflecting on their current status with each of the core features. And that's kind of the general way that this tool is organized. Now let's take a look at the way that the training curriculum is aligned to the tool. So this is an example of a school system that's using a wiki workspace to build their training curriculum. And notice we're going to use the same organizational structure that we used in our Fidelity tool. So we still have team composition, only with our training curriculum, we have a hyperlink to a specific PowerPoint. So anything that you see here that's blue and underlined is a hyperlink to training curriculum. So within a new team training event, we can go in and talk about what a team composition looks like. It sounds like we can provide examples, and we can give examples to the school during training. But we can also go back throughout the year and look at this specific module. If we're finding that when we're progress monitoring that this feature is only partially in place and that we don't really have the full range of people on our team that we need to have. So we're not only using this during our new team events, but we're really having the coach go back and utilize these training materials and these resources as we move throughout the year. The other consideration during team training is this notion that by the end of the training, the team is walking away with a personalized action plan. So we provide an action planner that, again, is aligned to the Fidelity tool that we're using. Right? So again, we're using those same constructs that you see in the actual tool, but now the action plan is also built into the curriculum. So as we move through the training event, school teams can identify their current status, identify improvement needs, and then build their action plan side by side as they move through the training event. So as you're building your professional development events, again, it's important that we are bringing teams together that are prepared, that have analyzed their data, that administrators are giving the time, space, and support for the teams to have ongoing and regular meetings and time for planning, that they're using not only fidelity data, but outcome data to assess the extent to which they are implementing well, and that a coach is guiding that work. We also want to make sure that the trainer during the event is facilitating an action planning process. So the trainer really has to be content fluent and has to have and provide continuous examples of how to apply that content in the context. So they are coming with examples from elementary, middle, and high school, and they're really able to have time to assess how that translates into their own school. Many of our training events are activity-based. So we use activities like resource mapping or working smarter or rethinking discipline activities to shape how the teams take that information back to the whole staff. So while they have an opportunity to practice that activity within the training, the expectation is that they take those activities then back to their schools and conduct some of those activities with their whole staff in order to get a common approach to moving through this process. So again, when we're thinking about moving into advanced tiers, we're going to still stick with that same matching the curriculum to the Fidelity tool. So here's a Tier 2 training curriculum example, but because our schools are kind of used to this organizational model and the way that we're approaching training, it comes so much easier to them when we move into advanced training curriculum. So again, similar construct. We have a core feature, we have a module that's aligned to that core feature, we have a range of examples that we can pull from so that we can examine our school organizational chart against kind of that gold standard when we're self-assessing our Fidelity. We're still going to use the same kind of action planner approach, so we're building in and facilitating and guiding an action planning process within that training event. So as your professional development and your plan goes and you're looking across the school year in order to plan for events across the school year, please make sure you understand that they can be delivered in a variety of ways. The in-person training events are absolutely critical. So when we're doing and delivering our summer events or our big booster sessions, to have the teams be able to plan in one room together is really a really nice approach because it builds that professional learning community. Teams have an opportunity during the training to brag about what they're doing, share examples, and share part of their action planning process. So it becomes a really rich kind of event and a professional learning community. But we can't discount the impact that video conferencing and webinars and ongoing phone conferences have throughout the year. So we want to make sure that we are delivering a variety of ways to get access to the information. And during the school year when it's more challenging to get teams out into a live training event, we want to really rely on video conferencing and webinars. We also want to make sure that we are supporting our district leaders and we're creating curriculum and having an understanding of their role and function in supporting the schools that they're in charge of. We also want to have access to coaches' curriculum and make sure that they have ongoing access to information and support throughout the year in addition to our building level teams. Again, remember as you're looking at your data and you're sorting your schools by need that there's some schools that may need additional training. We may need to slow down our pacing. We may need to get other people on the team. So there's always that adjustment kind of focus as we move through the year in supporting our schools. To make sure that we intensify the use of data and Fidelity tools for schools that need access to more, and that we can fade away that frequency for schools that are progressing through implementation at a pretty rapid pace. So for poll number 2, let's see if I can get this to work. Let me launch the poll. Our professional development plan and events is based on ongoing review of implementation data, both Fidelity and outcome. So as a district team, are you all using your Fidelity data to reflect and guide how you're positioning the way that you translate that into professional development and coaching? And I'll give you a couple of seconds to complete that. Looks like 60% of you. Thank you for submitting your answers. So it sounds like 60% of you have or are probably currently reviewing your data to determine how that's going to guide your training events for the summer. 28 strongly agree, so it looks like around 30% are absolutely using some of their data to reflect on how they're positioning their training and coaching. So that's awesome. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about coaching versus training and talk a little bit more about the coaching that's getting provided to your schools. So it's very important that we distinguish training versus coaching. Training is the presentation of material to develop new knowledge and skill, while coaching is that on-site support, that real-time use of a person that's had experience with implementing PBIS with fidelity. And their job is really to help the school apply that content knowledge within their setting, within their context. So it's the on-site support needed to use new knowledge and or skills under typical conditions. Chances are you've also seen this. So coaching really takes place across the cascade of implementation. So at the district level, we're positioning external coaching support to the schools, and we are building training curriculum and support for those external training providers and technical assistance providers. Within the school, we're also investing in building coaching and technical assistance support with our team leaders or our internal coaches. And we're using that mechanism to help school staff implement across the grade levels and into the classrooms. So the team is also playing a significant role in coaching and supporting implementation within those grade levels with the ultimate goal that our students are benefiting from this. So coaching really occurs across the cascade of implementation, and we're relying on many different people to provide supports to our schools. And of course, as with anything, we're focused on the outcomes. So when we do have coaches positioned working with our schools across the cascade, our outcome is really to help shape fluency with the trained skills. It's that rapid redirection from misapplying the information. It's checking for fidelity of the overall implementation and really progress monitoring throughout the year. And then when we do reach fidelity, how do we sustain that throughout the year? How do we keep it new and novel over time? How do we make this easier to implement for our teachers? How do we continue to get access to ongoing feedback from our staff and our community to ensure that we're aligning with the needs of the changing demographics that we get year to year? So really paying attention to our new staff coming in, paying attention to our students coming in, and the varying degrees of need that they have each year is going to be really important as we sustain over time. So we really want to focus on the outcomes of coaching. We also know that coaching has a lot of parts to it, with, again, the ultimate goal that we're engaged in activities that help others achieve their goals. So being able to really sit back and listen to what the administrator and the school improvement and this PBIS team identifies as their goals, the coach is one that's going to help shape towards meeting that goal. The coach has to have content expertise and mastering the what and the how and knowing how to adjust throughout. The coach is also going to have critical skills around relationships, knowing how to support, knowing how to communicate effectively, knowing when to back off, know when to push, right, that push and pull kind of thing. So having and fostering relationship with the team and understanding the team dynamics and how that plays an important role is also really critical. A coach needs to kind of sit back and look at from a system level lens to identify how we remove barriers and foster pathways with respect to policy, funding, data systems, those kind of big system enablers or sometimes barriers to implementation. The coach is also going to continuously go back to the implementation plan, adjust as needed, monitor for impact, and really make sure that data is front and center as we go through the process. The coach is also going to be responsible to be that communication lens between the school and the district. So it's shared on an ongoing basis. Now, that's a lot of work to do for one person. And oftentimes when we were selecting, in the beginning, when we were selecting our coaches to provide this kind of support, we had people a lot of times had intervention specialists who were really used to working with individual teachers in the classroom. We positioned them in roles of coaching PBIS support. And one of the things that happened as a result is that I don't think we were always necessarily clear about kind of the necessary skills that were required when you're moving from coaching from individual change to coaching for team or group change. So we've gotten better at training our coaches who are providing coaching support to teams. But I just want to make sure that we're organizing our support and organizing the work in kind of these three categories. So we have coaching for team and group change, where we're focused on that collaboration and facilitation, and we're paying attention to those group dynamics. But we also have different skill sets that are in place for coaching for individual change, where we're really inside that classroom, focused on individual skill development, focused on that delivering performance feedback to an individual. And that's a different skill than one of training and coaching teams. And then finally, being able to organize the work and understanding systems change. So having the coach understand how the organization moves through the stages of implementation, has knowledge about aligning different initiatives, and kind of anchoring things into a common implementation frame. So when you reflect back and look at this slide and think about all the different aspects of the work that a coach delivers, I think it will help to position our coaches in thinking about anchoring the work in these three categories. This also helps shape our training for our coaches and supporting them along the way. So when you're considering your coaching plan, make sure that you are providing training to your coaches that's anchored in those three types of coaching. Make sure that you're providing support for your coaches, that they feel like they've got time, space, and support to deliver what we're at and do what we're asking them to do. It's also important to track the behaviors of coaches. So a lot of our school systems are investing in a coaching log to track specifically what our coaches do and help us identify those kind of vital behaviors our coaches need to engage in order to have kind of that gold standard of implementation. And then again, as you're building your coaching plan, always go back to linking the effort of coaching to outcomes. As a result of putting these people in place and designating these roles and functions, are we getting our teams to reach fidelity quicker, and are we getting access to outcomes for our kids? So as you're building your coaching plan, please take into consideration those four components. We're going to move to our next poll. Our district-based coaches have ongoing contact and feedback from an experienced technical assistance provider. So are you all getting access to what you need in terms of technical assistance and training to feel like you're competent at the job that you're being asked to do? So I'll give you a couple more seconds. Wow, that's great. It looks like most of you strongly agree that you are getting access to technical assistance and feedback and feel like you're getting supported in the role that you're serving. I'm going to close that out and share those results. So we've got 49% of you who strongly agree, 33% who somewhat agree. So that's great. It sounds like you guys are getting access to what you need. Okay. So I'm wondering if Lucille was able to get back on. Doesn't sound
Susan,
like.
this is Jessica.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think she's still just in listening mode.
Okay.
But she is on. She's just not. Or her audio isn't working correctly.
Okay, great. So I'm looking at the time and want to honor that we were only supposed to be on for an hour, but I will review some of the pieces for building a professional development plan. And I'll go through these slides at rapid speed because we do want to get some feedback from you all about upcoming webinars. So I apologize that this is going to be kind of fast and furious. We've talked a little bit today about building training capacity, the importance of selecting the right people to deliver the training, and the fact that we need to really be positioning our trainers as action plan facilitators. So it's important to have knowledge about the content, but we also need our trainers to provide examples about how that content gets applied in the settings, and that school teams understand that the flexibility of the model. We also talked today about having the coaches be side by side throughout this process to make sure that we're not misapplying the core features as we augment it and change it for our settings. We talked about organizing the work around phases of implementation to make it much more doable. And then we have a working example of a professional development plan, and this is really focused on Tier 2. And a key feature of the sample plan is that they installed the basic foundations of Tier 2 before selecting and training on additional interventions. So they really paid attention to those Tier 2 systems features before they ramped up and added additional interventions to their training and their implementation plan. So again, one of the things we want you to look for is as you're building your professional development plan, notice how the activities are anchored on the phases of implementation. Notice that we're very specific about the activities that are getting delivered, about when those activities and visits occur, and the duration and various format and specific audiences. You can see that we've adjusted. We've got webinars, we've got on-site delivery of the content, and then it's progressing throughout each month as we move through the process. So this is, again, readiness. The specific activities are laid out. And again, you guys will have access to these slides, and we can give you access to a sample, to the sample plan to use for your own site. At installation phase, we're installing a Tier 2 basic strategy called check and check out, and that's really setting the stage for how we install the necessary systems. And again, notice that the frequency by which we're delivering technical assistance and training, and notice that it's a range of different audiences. So we're working at the building level, but we're also working specifically with administrators. We're working with district coaches. So that cascade of training and implementing and coaching is apparent throughout the levels of implementation. And then we move into implementation phase. So again, looking at the time, I realized I went through that at lightning speed. Apologize for that. We wanted to make sure you all are aware of our upcoming leadership forum, October 22nd and 23rd. That happens in Chicago, Illinois. And if you're interested in learning more, you can go to pbis.org and look at some of the sessions that we have available for you during that forum. And then again, if you could let us know what suggestions or requests you have for webinars for the 2015-16 school year. This is the last webinar for this school year, but we're really interested in finding out what you need more information on. Again, realizing today we jammed through a lot of slides in a very short time frame. We really want you to walk away today with some really key messages. We want to make sure that you understand that as you're investing in your team training, that you're investing in coaching and trainers, and that you've got the kind of that parallel construct. We wanted you to understand the difference between training and implementation, and we wanted to make sure that you knew that administrators have to be actively participating. You need data to reflect on that ongoing feedback and checking for fidelity and augmenting as you move through the process. So hopefully you got some access to some good resources today. I am looking at any questions. Jessica, are you seeing any questions that we might want to answer before we say goodbye? It looks like
I wanted to point out that folks. I just wanted to point out that people can access the online fidelity measures at PBS Assessments or www.pbisapps.org. That's a good place for folks to go to access information, to set up an account. It's very easy. It's free. I did post that URL in the questions responses several times, and I think that's it. There were a few questions about funding coaches. So do coaches get a stipend, or is it part of their FTE? I thought that was a great question, and that is contextual, right, Susan? It depends on what's going to make that a sustainable position. And then one question I'll mention, then you can respond to the coaching funding is you had mentioned tracking logs or logs for tracking coaches. Do you have a template for that, or do you have suggestions for how you would kind of keep track of coaching hours and contacts and things like that?
Yeah, we actually have examples if you're interested in getting an example of how we're tracking coaching behaviors. We have an online system that allows our coaches to enter in data around how they're spending their time. So if they're going into classrooms, they can specifically say they're working with a teacher on coaching for individual change. They can show how much time they're spending working with a team. They can show how much time they're spending analyzing the data. So it's an online log that really kind of is geared towards that, and we're happy to share anything we've developed with you as a way to guide how you move forward with tracking that information. Along the lines of funding, we're really trying to conduct these staff utilization audits, if you will, really identifying the ways that our staff are currently being utilized, especially our student services staff, so our school psychologists or school counselors or school social workers, to be able to kind of match role and function up to their job description and change their job description to better align with some of the coaching features that we discussed today is a really critical part of that ongoing systems kind of change process. So we're really examining how our staff are currently being utilized. We're then looking at the role and function that coaches provide, and then kind of saying, can we shift some of their roles and functions to be much more aligned with this? Because we know that when we invest in coaching, we get access to fidelity and outcomes for kids. So I worry when there's maybe a grant that comes along and there's extra funding that might get removed in a couple of years, that position will also get removed. So we really want to have a further dialogue about how we reposition our current staff to do some of the work that we've discussed today. Okay. So we've got a couple webinar suggestions, evidence-based interventions programming for Tier 2, Tier 3. And yes, we'll get that coaching log. We have, in terms of kind of backtracking on that coaching log question, we do have one that's made specifically for a state. Again, happy to share with you kind of the way that we have organized that log. But at this time, it's not available for for somebody to kind of pick up. You kind of have to modify it to fit your specific district or your specific state. But we can certainly share all the resources and the way that we've organized it with you.